Hey, Alice Marie.
Can you hear me?
I can. Sorry, you were muted.
Oh, that's okay.
And-
I'm using a new microphone.
And,
Sorry.
the woman standing behind me with a fly swatter. You've seen this in foreign countries. Part of my retinue. All right. We're going to continue in the process that we started last week. And we're going to go through the information that I gave you about how we do a complete astrological reading. So we've made it halfway through the chart and a little bit more. We've gone through the 7th house, and now we're going to move our attention to the 8th house of this chart. So somebody tell me about the rulers of the 8th house. Saturn is the chief ruler. Why?
It's in the house.
Because it falls in the house. What is the co-ruler?
Mercury in the 6th.
Mercury becomes the co-ruler. So we'll start off by doing a delineation of Saturn in the 8th house. The responses of death, inheritances, and other people's money.
Texas.
Taxes. All right, and let's talk about other people's money. This could be money that comes through gifts, grants, inheritances, collaborative ventures such as business partnerships, any way in which money might be pooled. In terms of taxes, it's all forms of taxes, from inheritance taxes to property taxes, income taxes, gross receipts tax. Any way in which tax is levied is governed by the 8th house. If we think about it as being the opposite of the 2nd house being personal wealth, 8th house is the other person's money. So it can also represent the partner's money and or the relationships that one might have in partnership around money. Not only does it rule death, but it rules the spirit world. And the 8th house is a succedent house, so we know it to be moderate in strength. It is a psychic house, so it tends to govern other worldly things, such as unseen entities, the disembodied, persons who have passed on. We think of the 12th house as inner plane enemies. The 8th house is inner plane friends. The inner plane friends can be, for example, in my background, in the Catholic tradition, everyone has a guardian angel. We would consider that an inner plane friend. In spiritualist traditions, everybody has one or more spirit guides. And these are inner plane friends that help to guide or direct us.
How about animal totems? Allies.
You know, I would venture to say that in the shamanistic tradition, the animal guides that some shamans use here and in Latin America, they're oftentimes, at least in Aztec tradition, referred to as Nahuals, which are every shaman has a spirit that it's associated with, so that it can shape shift and oftentimes take on that form. Both positive shamans as well as witches can take on those forms. In Western European traditions, witches oftentimes have, what did they call them? They're familiars. Thank you, Michael. Now, wherever Saturn falls in a chart, we experience
Loss.
or poverty, restrictions, hardship. So how would we apply an interpretation of Saturn to the 8th house?
Would that be difficulty?
This can mean that it's actually there are limitations or restrictions around receiving money from others. Those of you at a distance couldn't hear. Could you end up in poverty due to somebody's death? And yes, Saturn governing the 8th house can create losses through death. When Saturn's in the 8th, it oftentimes creates a lifetime where losses are felt deeply. So these are different ways that we work with our interpretation, and one of the advantages with Saturn in the 8th house is it does tend to make one cautious about debt. However, that caution about indebtedness usually comes after having had the experience of getting in debt. Once one has had that experience, when they have Saturn in the 8th house, their tendency is to avoid debt like the plague because it becomes painful. It becomes burdensome. Okay, let's look at the aspects that Saturn receives. Saturn has a sextile to the Sun, semi-square to the Moon, a semi-square to Venus, sesqui-square to Mars, a sesqui-square to Uranus, an inconjunct to Pluto, semi-square to the midheaven, and a trine to the ascendant. I am also someone who has Saturn in the 8th house, with forming a trine to my ascendant, and a delineation I got on that about 35 years ago. If it weren't for that, you wouldn't have a tooth left in your body.
The one for the trine?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the trine from Saturn to the ascendant looks like it's beneficial, as is the sextile to the Sun. But overall, Saturn is a weak and discordant planet in this chart. So it will tend to bring, as Saturn naturally does, being the greater benefic, problems here through inheritances, legacies, through tax matters. A piece of great advice from someone with Saturn in the 8th house: hire a good CPA, because chances are, I am always told by other people how much I love to do accounting and record keeping. The fact of the matter is, I do not. But I do it for what reason? The simple answer is because not doing it is more painful.
Yes, Saturn compels you to do it, right?
Saturn is duty driven. If you decide you're going to learn from the area where Saturn falls in your chart, you can really gain skill. I've also been treasurer of other organizations before. Why? Because I love doing it? No, because I developed a habit system at an early age where I can do it. Saturn's the most discordant planet in my chart, so there is little to no pleasure in doing it other than in knowing it's been done. So that's how Saturn works. Now for a parent, since this is a juvenile's chart, what one would do is, how would one function as a parent, knowing that this is one of the troubled areas of the chart?
Get the child used to an allowance and being responsible for their money.
Brilliant. Learn how to do accounting, balance a checkbook, having transparency in fiduciary matters. But instead of ignoring money, learning about it. Also learning about the process of borrowing money. and the way in which it must be repaid, and or saving for a rainy day. Why? With Saturn in the 8th house, that day will come. Now, what about Mercury governing the 8th house? Because we always look to the sign on the cusp of the house, and the planet or planets which governs that sign is the co-ruler. Anyone want to address Mercury's influence on the 8th house?
Well, Mercury's in the 6th house, and therefore the 6th house would have some bearing upon the 8th house. So would one speculate here that perhaps could this lady...
It does. And yes, this is somebody who might, in their later years, choose an occupation that could be tied into hospice, death or dying, chaplaincy work with the dying.
Or just geriatrics.
Geriatrics, somebody who may go into hospitals and play the harp or guitar or music in the hospice ward. So the 6th house has to do with one's occupation or work. And in this case, the 8th house is to some degree subservient to the 6th house of work or labor. Now, in another vein, this is also someone who might use her skills to do bookkeeping, accounting. She might work in the or in the pension fund for a corporation or a studio. It's somebody whose work could take on the oversight of other people's money. And if we think of Mercury as having to do with writing, communication, with details, could end up working with estate planning and or pension planning. So there's different ways where we can interpret this. When the 8th house planet falls in the 6th house, it says here it's influenced by work, employees, and illness. So this is how we're making the link in the chart between these houses and the planetary rulers. Now let's move on to the 9th house. The governing planet, it's the moon in Virgo, and the co-ruler, the sun. And here the sun falls in Taurus in the 7th house. So the 9th house is ruled by both the sun and moon. Wherever the moon falls, we experience fluctuation, moods, quick, subtle changes. The moon is also our domestic urges. So where the moon falls, we have feelings and family. In this case, what I have synced with charts that have the moon in the 9th house is sometimes the natives move out of the country and take up home abroad. That's one possibility. What about in terms of education? How does Virgo express? What is its keyword?
Analytic.
It is analytical. So the keyword is I analyze. So in terms of one's attraction to a faith or a religion, what might be certain key operative factors? Is being drawn to a faith that makes sense and can be analyzed or evaluated.
Or a fascination with comparative religion.
That's another great delineation. Laura used the word comparative, which the nature of Virgo is to contrast and to compare. And that's part of how we make sense out of religion, is when we're able to do that with other faiths. Yes, wherever the moon is in your chart, your feelings about that area of your life will fluctuate. Moods could influence their thoughts about faith. And I have seen people with the moon in the 9th house who have changed their religion more than one time. As the moon is the domestic urges, the family faith could be a factor. Now, what about the sun ruling the ninth house? Let's do a delineation there. Right, religion can be important to the person when the sun rules or is the co-ruler of their ninth house. Why? The sun is our self-esteem. So this is someone whose self-esteem can either be tied up with her faith or with her need to accomplish in higher education. Now, I believe last week we determined that she had trouble in lower education, with Neptune in the third house possibly contributing to some informational processing issues. That early education could be a challenge, but when faced with higher education, this is a girl who might take on a challenge. Some area where she can sink her teeth into, the eye analyze of the moon, but also with the sun, where successes that were not able to be achieved in early education might actually take place in higher education, and therefore higher education could become an environment of self-esteem or self-worth. Now, let's look at the house where the co-ruler falls. So religion, matters of religion, education, travel are subservient to relationships. So here's an example. This may be a girl who doesn't want to travel alone. The desire is to travel with a partner, with a companionship. Or perhaps she meets her mate, spouse, significant other through church or an avenue of higher education, or sitting in the next seat to her on her, flight to Lima, Peru.
Just looking at that elevated moon in the ninth in Virgo, she might end up being a really good dream analyst, or getting into, studying the intuitive or the non-rational. Do you think?
Yeah, definitely could become an analyst of some type. What is striking, though, is that the moon does oppose Uranus. So that I would use that to form a significant connection here. What about the moon opposing Uranus? How might that impact one's emotions?
It could give mood swings.
Mood swings, and volatile mood swings, and sudden
Mars there too.
mood swings.
With Mars, there are violent mood
And with Mars, violent mood swings. So I would say there's a possibility this is someone who could have tantrums.
I think that there's a misconception about the bipolar, because there's the bipolar 1 from Silver Linings Playbook, and they really need to be hospitalized. And then there's the bipolar 2s who just have the mood swings, but you don't need to throw them away. And then when someone kills somebody on the news, they go, oh, they're bipolar. And the bipolar 2s are getting a bad rap.
We don't want that to happen. But there definitely can be extremes that take place under this that may not warrant a psychological diagnosis, but might also fall under a diagnosis. But in this case, with the moon opposing Uranus and Mars, there are great and volatile emotional swings that take place. And because of that, there could be issues that come up over education at some point. Because wherever there's an opposition, you have something separating. And this could be a child wanting to go to school away from home, but then might find that too difficult, could have a need to then return home. So the desire to escape from the home is always going to be there.
Christopher,
Yes.
regarding Virgo on the midheaven and the moon right there in the ninth house, I'm keep coming back to that Mercury moon trine and the Virgo on the midheaven, and I keep seeing a writer in this person. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that needs to be encouraged. And let's talk about the midheaven. The aspect between the moon and the midheaven is very powerful. If we look here, it's less than 2 degrees apart. So the moon is the most elevated planet in the chart. This is going to be something significant that stands out in her. Might be her philosophies, her way of analyzing things, her intuitive impressions, being able to combine sort of intuition and rational thought in some way. She could become significant. When the moon's on the midheaven, there is the potential to be a household name. So there's a lot of visibility indicated in this chart. Now, the moon is at 4 Virgo, the midheaven 5, and Mercury at 7 Taurus. And those particular trines in the chart, from Mercury to the moon and Mercury to the midheaven, are in some ways a saving grace. The Neptune in the 3rd house for a writer, Laura referred to this from the fascination with dreams. It could be an interest in symbolism, in mythology, in magical realism. The thing you don't lack when you have Neptune in the 3rd house is imagination.
Right.
So that's also important in a writer. Well, the 7th house is your ability to form relationships publicly. It is your window on the world, but it has more to do with your individual relationships with people that you interact with in the public. Whereas the 10th house in the midheaven is really more the public eye or the visibility, Visibility can be notoriety or fame. Now, if we move to the 10th house, which is career, unoccupied, Mercury, Virgo's on the cusp, Mercury is the ruler. The 10th house is powerful in this chart. It is 4th in power, but it's not because it's occupied. It's 4th in power because the midheaven receives aspects from all of the planets except for Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. And 2 of those aspects are oppositions. 2 of them are squares. The one trine is Mercury. If I was the parent of this child, knowing that Mercury is the conciliatory factor between the oppositions to the midheaven and the moon, Mercury in this chart trines the moon and sextiles Uranus. Learn early nonviolent communication.
And to talk things through.
Because of these oppositions, she has oppositions along this axis and along the axis between the sun and the ascendant. This is somebody who has a great deal of internal conflict. What you want to do is work with Mercury and to use that here to break up the oppositions between the moon, Uranus, Mars, because it's engaged harmoniously with all of those planets, and it becomes what we call a conciliatory factor. You work with language. Mercury is in Taurus. You work with song. You work with music. You work with writing. Because there is the potential for learning disabilities, music and song might be a way to pull out the intelligence or the communication in a way that might possibly struggle with reading and or writing. with grammar, punctuation, and the other rules associated with language. But yes, there is a potential here for being a writer, and with the moon in the 9th house trining Mercury, there is the potential to be published. Not all writers get published. Right, you can self-publish and print a minimum print of 50 books. Or you can do a blog online that you may never publish, but thousands of people might read it. So there are, the 9th house is other ways of being visible. What else does the 10th house rule? Mother, bosses, superiors, authority figures. Let's talk about her relationship to authority figures. Well, in this rather discordant chart, the 10th house is only mildly discordant. Since the ruler of the 10th house trines the midheaven, there's a good chance here this is somebody who would be able to communicate with bosses, superiors, or those in authorities and be able to get her ideas across. Will she be connected to her mother? Yes. And why would you say that?
Well, for one, because of that trine. Also, the moon is up there very close,
Thank
which I
you.
associate with mother.
That's the aspect I was after. With the moon conjuncting the midheaven, there could be a very powerful emotional bond with the mother. However, the mother in this relationship could become subject to the girl's criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't the mother also be a very critical mother?
Or the mother could be perceived by the child as being critical. So it could be a two-way street. It doesn't have to be just a one-way street. This is something that could go both directions. The advantage that the mother has over the child is adults sometimes have a better opportunity at controlling their behavior than children do. And so the mother of this child would have to be very careful how she chose her words so that they aren't being interpreted as constantly carping
Right.
on the daughter.
That would be devastating.
Right. It would be emotionally devastating to feel that, for the daughter to feel like she could never do anything right. Let's go to best case scenario. Moon, Virgo, midheaven, Virgo, conjunct moon in the 9th house. The mother endeavors to picture the best for the daughter and knows that education is the avenue through which that can take place, and encourages her to levels of excellence in the academic realm. Even though she struggles with learning, to just always have an attitude that you are smart, you have an analytical mind, and you can apply that to any subject matter. And you would want to not necessarily encourage argumentiveness and tantrums, which can come with the moon, Uranus, Mars oppositions, but you would want to encourage the quality of debate, public speaking, and playing the devil's advocate. Let's take opposing points of view and let's argue this out. If they do it continuously, it gets pretty darn exhausting. However, when it's done with the idea of enhancing the innate intelligence of the child, it can be a good thing. Now let's move to the 11th house. Jupiter in Libra. Libra on the cusp. 11th house matters. All right, wherever Jupiter falls, we experience
Abundance. Excessiveness sometimes.
Now, the co-ruler is
Venus
Venus.
in the 7th.
And where Venus falls, we experience gifts, gratuities.
And there's a nice trine between the two.
And what did we say about a Venus-Jupiter trine?
Yeah, probably very popular.
Okay.
Maybe overweight.
Venus-Jupiter trine can bring social popularity. This is a girl who can make friends and keep friends. But we can also sort it by harmony. And Jupiter is the second most harmonious planet. The sixth house is the second most harmonious house. And Libra is the most harmonious sign. So, what I would say to this person, if I were counseling them, I would tell them that their wealth is their friends. And that there is a tendency with this chart for good things to come through friends. And that it's worthwhile to spend time cultivating and developing social relationships, engaging in groups, clubs, and organizational activities, charitable causes, etc. Because it's through those public social contacts that the opportunities will flow. What happens when planets are retrograde? We consider them
Repressed.
so, the qualities come later in life. It takes some exceptional effort to bring out. But once they're developed, the great thing is about retrograde planets in our chart is there's always new playgrounds to explore. There's new areas of ourselves to cultivate and bring into the foreground as we get older. However, when planets are Mercury or retrograde, it oftentimes gives the opportunity to go over things or develop things further, deeper. And so when Mercury's retrograde, it's often a time where we can do our underground work in research and development. Venus ruled 11th house.
Is it possible, because Venus is in the 7th, that she could actually meet a partner, a husband, and friend first?
Excellent delineation. Yes. One's marriage partner could come through first being a friend or being introduced by a friend or met through a group club or a social event. Let's talk about the type of friends that come with Jupiter in the 11th house. Lucky, generous, abundant, wealthy, jovial,
Larger than life.
Maybe a little good in the arts.
With Libra, which is Venus, that would attract artists, musicians, dancers,
Very social.
and persons who might pay attention to their grooming, fashion, appearance. So, this is a child one would really early on encourage to cultivate social relationships. Because this is the area of wealth in this chart, this is where ultimately marriage partnership can take place, where an abundance of well-wishers can happen. We want to stimulate at an early age the areas where we can have luck. Giving good counsel in the area of friendships, encouraging friendships and social engagements would be important. Now, the 12th house, the house of secret sorrows, self-undoing. I like to consider the 12th house, those are the old-timey interpretations. I call the 12th house the house of inner space. Because we tend to go in retreat, we tend to explore consciousness through the 12th house. Scorpio, on the cusp of the 12th house.
You're secretive.
Deep, secretive are two terms that have come up. What about secret sorrows, which the 12th house rules?
Yeah.
Pluto in the first, that's one ruler, and Mars in the fourth.
All right. When the ruler of your 12th house falls in your first house, what are you unhappy with?
Yourself.
Yourself, your appearance. And when the ruler of the 12th house falls in your 4th house, what are you unhappy with?
Your
home,
Your home, your family members,
father,
or the father. There has to be a constructive approach to both areas. The problem when one is unhappy with themselves, and in the past, you don't find this as much in Albuquerque as you do in LA. Plastic surgery. It does exist. In Los Angeles, my hometown, I would get a lot of clients who were looking for dates for plastic surgery. There is an arrangement where you're unhappy with your appearance. There's oftentimes a good chance that even though you've changed something, you may not be delighted by it. And then what happens is you have to change something else.
Oh no, Michael Jackson.
You just might become obsessed with it in this, drive for perfection.
And that's the Pluto feature in the first house you're talking about?
Ruling the
The
12th.
sort of obsessive, relentless,
Focus on self.
right.
So it's going to be very important to get sincere reinforcements about appearance. Of course, anybody who's upset with their appearance, sometimes there's no amount of reinforcement you can give that makes them feel better. But in times, when somebody's saying, oh, my hair is so frizzy, I can't stand it, complimenting at that time might only reinforce the discord. It has to be done freely and unexpectedly. And it has to be done sincerely. So, you look great in that, or your hair looks great today. Now.
Christopher, one question.
Yes.
Can I have a question? First house is also a health house.
Yes.
It is a part of that house. And Pluto in that house, could this be somebody who regenerates easily, who heals quickly?
Scorpio.
Yes, I would say that it's not just because of Pluto, but to me, Scorpio on the ascendant is, the lizard aspect. You're able to grow another tail. There is that ability for self-healing. But Pluto, the ruler of the 12th house in the first house, could also create some obsessiveness with one's own psychological states or internal states of being.
Might also be a sex-obsessed person, although the Pluto's in Sag.
Nevertheless, you have Scorpio rising. You do think about sex.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Question?
yes.
Assuming that this girl is going to need a therapist, which house would you with the seventh house?
The 7th house is the therapist.
So, well,
Now, the overall chart would say you might need a therapist.
and I
The
look for-
7th house would indicate what you might want to look for.
Yeah.
The sun could be a man. Venus could be a woman. But you might want to look for somebody with the sun who has a reputation, who has had successes. It could be purely about a therapist that is genial, warm, and can greatly stimulate feelings of self-worth and self-esteem.
And Taurus, they have someone who's rock solid.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And loving as well.
With Venus, yeah.
Mm,
The thing that I would like to point out is that the third most powerful planet in the chart is Mars, and that is the co-ruler of 12th house.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the Moon-Mars opposition, and obviously Mars-Uranus conjunction. And there's a lot of turmoil there, and I think that is perhaps more key to the problems and stresses that she may shovel under the carpet into a private space, as it were. And I think that is the real stress with the chart.
Absolutely, that is the stressor in the chart. That and the sun opposing the ascendant, which might be the most powerful aspect. Let's switch to the back of this sheet and let's look at aspects right now. Because the most powerful aspect is going to be indicative of very powerful idiosyncrasies.
It's what you just cited, sun opposed ascendant.
The next strongest aspect is a parallel from the sun to the ascendant. So in this case, it's a double whammy. Not only is it powerful, it is intensified. It's powerful with the speakers cranked up.
Where do you see the parallel?
If you look at underneath the grade diagonal squares, and you go to the lower left corner, you'll see the parallel is 13.56 astrodynes. The opposition, which is at the other end of that square, is 14.59 astrodynes. So let's talk a little bit about this aspect, since it's going to be so significant in this girl's life. What are the points involved? We've decided it's the sun and the ascendant. What do these represent in our psyche? The sun is the power urges, our self-esteem, our self-worth, our sense of significance.
And the ascendant has to do with one's sense of self as well.
And the ascendant is our sense of self as it's experienced through having a physical body. It's our identity and our appearance. The sun is powerful in this chart. It's the third strongest planet. The only points that are more powerful are the Venus and the midheaven. So if we were to look at this in terms of the ranking or her hierarchy of needs, what does the dominant Venus crave more than anything?
Love.
Love. Love. Love. Affection. Warmth. Caring. Friendship. Love, love, love.
You were associating the male therapist with the sun, and that's her much more discordant, challenging opposition to her ascendant.
Right, that is the stronger conflict. And sometimes we choose therapy, we choose the sex of the parent that is our greatest source of conflict, because there's the opportunity to resolve. At other times, we may be looking to find the good parent in that therapist. So it's hard to say, and she might need, since she could spend some time in therapy, she might have to switch off. But Venus is dominant in this chart. Let's talk about the strongest needs that she has. What are ways to cultivate Venus positively?
Artistic expression.
Artistic expression is one of the best ways.
The art.
Music and the arts, or dance. Venus is in Gemini, which could be literature and writing, stories. Being able to, if she has trouble writing, then it could be using verbal skills to be able to become a storyteller. So Venus is always going to be expressing. This girl needs to love and be loved. And quite frankly, little more will matter. The midheaven is powerful. So she also needs to amount to something. With her moon up there, conjunct the midheaven, there is this need to be successful, accomplished, visible, to have a goal.
It's square Venus as well.
Moon, Venus squares and oppositions in the first two classes when we dealt with depression. What type of depression comes from this aspect? Nobody loves me.
Oh,
This is somebody who really wants to love and be loved and may not believe that exists. She could draw the conclusion that whenever somebody criticizes her or disagrees with her or doesn't have time for her, that is the ultimatum. It actually means they don't love me. So learning about love and its various expressions is going to be really important, but having a rich artistic life can be very important for this girl, because there may be things she's able to express creatively that aren't being stifled by what we believe to be some learning disabilities in the chart. She may express clearly a creative intelligence. But the sun is third in power, and the person with the dominant sun has a powerful will. It is in Taurus. How might that will express?
stubborn.
Without flexibility. My way or
The highway.
the highway. And it's opposing the ascendant, which is in Scorpio, another fixed sign. We just heard the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario of this intense polarization between Taurus and Scorpio? Dogged determination.
You could be determined to make that marriage work.
You could be determined to make anything work. And we know that the human will is this very powerful thing and can make things happen. So, much to the chagrin of her parents, this is the child, if she doesn't eat peas, she could sit in the kitchen all night, refusing to eat peas.
I've known a couple of those.
Yes, but nevertheless, when there was something constructive to be done, she could work at it tirelessly until it is completed. And that's the advantage of that intense opposition in this chart. When it's put to a good will and a good use, it can work wonders. If it's put to a bad will or down some lines of destructiveness, then its powers are also unparalleled. What is the best planet in this chart?
Mercury.
Mercury. We use the astrodynes to sort by harmony. So Mercury is the best planet. Jupiter is next. There are only 3 harmonious planets in the chart. With Mercury emphasizing the qualities of writing, literature, storytelling. Sometimes if people have difficulties with language arts, they might excel in math. This is quite often when you're being tested. When you enter the university, you're tested on math skill and language arts, and the counselors I've spoken to usually say one is pronounced or the other. So Mercury does, to some degree, govern both, and it's discovering her strength. Is her strength in language arts? Is it in calculation? But find out which comes easily, and then emphasize that, because that will be put to use, and that will become the savior in the chart. What's the greatest discord? Let's go to the bottom of the pile. It's Mars. Can anyone express some Mars difficulties? Temper. Being accident prone. So one can either express aggressively or one can attract aggressive events, hostile events. Mars is in Pisces, which can tend to be more passive-aggressive. And I also think when one has a Mars like this, you have to early in life learn how to pick your battles. What's really worth making a fuss about?
Although when it's conjunct Uranus, you may not get a lot of choice in that. You can think about it after the fact, after you blew up, or after you were oversensitive and volatile.
Right. Mars-Uranus conjunction is like a lightning strike.
And people in the home with you may learn to walk on eggshells so that they don't tick you off, unexpectedly. I was born with Mars conjunct Uranus, but not in Pisces, in Gemini. In my case, it's made for multiple interestedness, being
Passionate about many things.
yes, and kind of multi-talented, but also easily scattered and hard to focus and, disciplined in that way.
Well, Pisces and Gemini are very similar in that they are dual signs.
Right.
And they're mutable signs. Gemini, though, is air and intellectual. Pisces is more emotional. And this can create more emotional confusion than just intellectual scatteredness, if that's
Right.
even a word.
So it might be a very challenging situation to relate to this person because you never would know when you're gonna,
Be ducking.
that's right.
And again, with this opposition, it may be someone who responds well to pet therapy. Because of the empathy of Pisces, the sensitivity to other living things,
The moon.
where, human beings may just piss you off, but you can be far more forgiving to goldfish, puppies, and llamas. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you can do therapy through those type of techniques and learn how to be caring and ease your temper or anger through nurturing other living things. Now, the houses, the seventh house is strongest. What's most important? The other people in her life. A challenge with oppositions from the first to seventh house is getting lost in other people. And so this is going to be a challenge with the sun opposing the ascendant, because when the self-esteem is tied in with a partner, it's hard to be alone, and there's the tendency to place the partners above oneself. Fourth house, home and family. And as I said last week, she can't live with them, yet she can't live without them. And then the first house, health, self, physical body. These are going to be the big 3 points of interest in this girl's life. And they're all extremely discordant, though the greatest discord in the chart is the fourth house, home and family. And that's really hard news to give it to any parent. It's a hard thing to say to a parent, but at the same time, it can be relief to some degree to know why a child is so angry or so angry at home or so disagreeable towards family or why family is a chronic source of irritation. It's built in. It's almost like a genetic factor. And it's not necessarily going to be enjoyed, but sometimes when we understand something, some relief comes.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, because Mars conjuncting Uranus is unpredictable, martial arts, as the core of their training, is learning to control one's aggression rather than to have it unravel. And so, yes, I would say that could be, and because with a strong discordant Mars, she could also be subject to violence, and that violence could be within the home. This is someone who might need to know how to protect herself. I'm not saying necessarily abuse from a family member, but with a chart like this, you can't exclude that.
The fourth house is usually associated with origin, right?
And end of things. Conditions surrounding the end of life.
Right.
Please don't keep electrical appliances in the bathroom. With Mars conjunct Uranus and Pisces. Yeah.
Right.
The greatest harmony in the chart is the sixth house of work and labor. So pride needs to be developed early on in doing housework, homework, chores, being of service to others, walking the neighbor's dog, whatever the activities are that involve employment. These signs, Taurus is dominant, describe a Taurus personality. Stubborn or obstinate. Pisces, sensitive, empathetic, caring, visionary, but also prone to worry and anxiety. Virgo, highly analytical, intelligent, but also prone to criticism and hypersensitive to criticism. And Scorpio, passionate, intense, sexual, healing. So these are dominant expressions in temperament. The harmony, Libra, beauty, balance, refinement. The discord is Pisces, worry, anxiety. Normally, at the beginning of reading a chart, we look at certain generalities, such as planets retrograde, planets stationary. Pull out your 7 steps in judging from a previous class, our first class. What do we know about retrograde planets? They're repressed. And here we have, I can see at a glance, 2 retrograde planets, Jupiter and Pluto. So areas of self-discovery over time will be Jupiter, the abundance of friends she has, Pluto in the first house, her personal resourcefulness, and her ability to cooperate and work with others. Planets above the horizon tend to be public. Here, the public houses are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So we have the Sun, Venus, Saturn, Moon, Jupiter. 5 planets out of 10. What does this inform us? That the planets are evenly distributed above and below the horizon. So she's going to be both prone to publicity as well as wanting to be secretive or hidden. Yes, both luminaries are above the horizon and in powerful aspects to angles. The Sun opposes the ascendant, the Moon conjuncts the midheaven. So, try as she may, she won't be able to sneak around. Now, planets on the eastern half of the chart, which are houses 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, and 3, there are only 3 planets, Jupiter, Pluto, and Neptune. So the majority of the planets, we have Uranus, Mars, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Saturn, and Moon, all on the west side of the chart. And this tends to represent somebody who tends to be shaped or molded by their circumstances, rather than being able to set out and make things happen. Juvenile female number 1 is going to spend a lot of her life responding to the events of her life and the environment. Now, in terms of the power of the chart, we look at planets in angular, succedent, and cadent houses. And one way to do this is to go to the summary on the Astrology page. And we can also pull that up with the horoscope program. Angular houses 1, 4, 7, 10. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets. Half her planets are in angular houses. What can we say? It's a powerful chart. All right, so the girl's got power. Girl power. Quality, movable, fixed, mutable. If we look at the qualities, here we can see that the mutable signs are strongest. Which are the mutable signs? Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces.
Right.
So, Pluto in Sag, Uranus and Mars in Pisces, Venus in Gemini, Moon and Midheaven in Virgo. So there's strong influence in the mutable signs, and mutable signs tend to be adapters. But we can see fixed signs are next. What's weak here are the movable signs, since they only have 18%. So this girl will tend less to initiate things, but more to adapt ideas and to perfect ideas, to build upon the ideas of others. If we look at triplicity or quality, well, we just did that. Let's look at triplicity: fire, earth, air, and water. We call these elements. The most powerful element is earth. The earth signs are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. We have Mercury in Taurus and the moon and midheaven in Virgo, making this energy the most powerful among her elements. And what are the hallmarks of an earth personality?
Grounded, commonsensical, rational, reliable, often.
All good qualities.
Loyal.
We look at the societies, which are personal, companionship, public. Personal houses are 12. Our personal or private inner world, our private sorrows. The first house, what's more personal than your body? Second house, your personal wealth. The third house, your private thoughts. The houses of companionship are 4, 5, 6, and 7. Companions in the home, companions in love, companions at work, companions in life. And then lastly, the public houses, 8, 9, 10, 11. Public houses is your public money. The 8th house is your credit report. The 9th house is your publicly expressed opinions. The 10th house is your public career. And the 11th house are your public associates, your friends or acquaintances. So if we look here among personal, companionship, and public, the predominant energy are 5 planets in the houses of companionship. The weakest are the personal houses. So this young woman will tend to favor companionships over her own personal interest. So you may place them as being more important, but it gives you a lot of drama in life. And then life, wealth, association, and psychism. The trinity of life are houses 1, 5, and 9. Trinity of wealth, 2, 6, 10. Trinity of association, 3, 7, 11. And the trinity of psychism, 4, 8, 12. And we can see here that association wins out. Neptune in the 3rd, Sun and Venus in the 7th, Jupiter in the 11th. What could we say about someone with a powerful trinity of association? Their alliances with other people are going to be one of the things that runs their life. So, I think we have done a thorough reading. How do all of you feel?
Yeah, great.
The potential, certainly the houses for romance and partnership fall in companionship. So, we have reached 4 minutes after the hour. I'm going to bring the class to a close. Are there any parting comments?
Thank you, Christopher. Great class.
Thank you for being here. Remember, there is no class next week.